Hello, my name is Ongere Kukumu. Welcome to another episode of the Beware series. We are talking about Absalom. And today we're going to talk about the struggles of Absalom. Remember, when you read Genesis chapter 4, and I want us to read this. Verse 10 and verse 12. And God said, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. So now you are cast from the earth, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you till the ground, it shall no longer yield its strength to you. A fugitive and a vagabond you shall be on the earth." That is Genesis 4, from verse 10 to verse 12. But I want us to read verse 16 and verse 17. Then Cain went out from the presence of the Lord. Remember, he gets out of the presence of the Lord with a curse. And dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. And he built a city and called the name of the city of the name of his son Enoch. Now, imagine this. Even after Cain moved from the presence of the Lord with a curse, he still had the capacity to build a city. Let me repeat that. Even after Cain moved out of the presence of the Lord with a curse, he still built a city. Just because Balaam was once a prophet of God and was venturing into witchcraft did not mean that he lost his prophesying ability. Now, Absalom is not operating with the wisdom of God. He's not operating with the favor of God. But what does Absalom do? Even after committing murder, remember what he did with Amnon, just as we see in the case of Cain, a killing of a brother, you realize that Absalom still had the capacity to rise the ranks. But for Absalom to rise the ranks, it came with much struggle. It came with years of effort. It came with him trying to convince people on the gates every single day. It came with him trying to deceive the general and deceiving David. It came with him literally having a crew of spies. It came with him literally playing chess with the lives of people. There was much struggle that came before Absalom rose. At times you could be struggling in ministry, not because you are called, but because you called yourself. Just because you left a particular ministry with a particular sin that you did not want to deal with a particular habit you did not want to deal with a kind of arrogance that, of course, will not be supported by God, does not mean that once you leave that ministry with a curse, that you won't be able to build a ministry of your own. Yes, you will even rise the ranks and build a ministry of your own, but you're still operating from a curse. Just because Cain was cursed did not mean that he could not build a city. Just because Absalom was cursed did not mean that he could not rise the ranks and be a king. Even kings can operate from a curse. And you can imagine that Absalom endures much struggle, gets to the throne, but all he had to leave the moment he died was a monument. All that Cain lives, right, even though he leaves children, there is a city to boast about. There are times even we as observers may look at a person's ministry and we may admire the things that are happening in that ministry, only to realize that you are admiring a monument of Absalom, only to realize that you are admiring a city of Cain. Yet God himself has his own city, has his own rules, has his own recommendations, has his own way of doing things. There are times when you want to ascend, like Absalom, there are certain compromises you end up making. There are certain compromises you find yourself making that you may ascend. And once you ascend, you are so compromised that whatever you get to do, even at that point of authority, becomes a thing of a sign and a wonder. Will you imagine Absalom with the compromises he made to get to the top, the people he deceived, the people that had to weep, the murder? He gets there and he literally sleeps with the concubines of his father publicly. He literally appoints people who are willing to give him terrible kind of advice. Eventually, the Bible says we shall know them by their fruit. Eventually, Absalom shall be known by his fruit. Absalom shall be known for what he truly is. Because even when Absalom is rising, sadly, for us to have false prophets, we have false saints. We have people who are funding that ministry because that bill did not drop from heaven. Things don't work like that. The finances that you see backing up a false prophet have come from false saints, have come from deceived saints. Imagine this. Absalom convinced people that he was the right guy for the job. Absalom convinced people that he was the one who was fit for the job. And Absalom was literally speaking against the anointed. You know, David was also called the anointed. Absalom speak against the anointed, and at the same time, they speak of how they're a better option. They speak of how, if only I had a church, if only I had a building, if only I had an opportunity, if only I had a microphone, if only I had. And once you see that, once you see Absalom's beauty, Absalom's charisma, Absalom's ability, what comes to mind? Oh, so the only thing he needs is opportunity. Then we end up giving Absalom opportunity and we forsake the anointed only for the rest of the population that serves under Absalom to weep once more. Only for those under Absalom to account for the lust that Absalom has. Because for Absalom to rise to power, he has a lust. He doesn't have a strong sense of justice. He has a lust. He has a desire. Him getting to the throne is his desire so that he can exploit people, so that he can have opportunity to perform the sins that he couldn't perform if he didn't have that role. Let me tell you the truth. For when Absalom is rising, he is seeking a greater opportunity to sin. Absalom, when he's rising, he wants to have an opportunity to do the kind of sins he cannot do in his current position. That's why when the Bible says that we shall know them by their fruit, eventually they will use the position they have to do evil things. So when Absalom is rising, Absalom rises with much struggle. And he is willing to go through that struggle because he knows the end game is pleasure. The end game is hedonism. The end game is him using the role that he will get to exploit people and to indulge in the desires he couldn't indulge in when he didn't have that particular role. So once we see a person rise by the Absalom spirit, we will get to see certain patterns of sin that existed before he rose but were only waiting for an opportunity. At times, money, for example, does not change people. Money simply exposes them because money gives them an opportunity to do certain things they couldn't do just because they were broke. Now, if the throne does not just change people, the throne exposes people. How sad it would be if a person has secret sins. Because if you do have secret sins, what the throne will do, the throne will expose you. And once you get to the throne, you have nothing to hide because you have no one to convince. You're already there. And what was once a pet dragon becomes lord over you. And once you get there, the sin that got you there now has authority over you and dictates how you rule over people, how you do your things, how you carry out your activities. It becomes a dangerous thing. So when Absalom is struggling, he's struggling because the reward according to him is sweet. There is a lust that he has. He is driven by lust. He's driven by the desire to get the top. Nothing will stop him from getting to the top. People are convinced that he deserves to be at the top. But once he gets to the top, his mind is not to the people. His mind is to himself, to a point where he will not raise sons, but he will raise monuments. That is a story for another day. I'll end it at that.